are going to dig into some insights that we at Save the Children learned as part of our annual childhood report, also titled Childhood in the Time of COVID. But first, just want to give you a brief overview of the session. So I'll talk about Save the Children and more specifically what we do here in the US briefly, and more specifically too on what we're doing during the pandemic. And then we'll turn it to Annette to talk a little more about First Start partnerships and their support for kids and families. Then we'll dig into the annual report, first just talking about the history of the report, and then this year's report in particular, which focuses on the impact of kids and families due to COVID. And then dig into some of the Pennsylvania findings that the report can glean when it comes to kids and families and what they're experiencing during COVID statistically. And then turn it back to Annette to talk about First Start partnerships, family surveys that they've been doing that can provide some good insights on the impact of kids and families there in Franklin County. And then I'll just turn you to some tools and resources related to the report, and we can open up to your questions. So Save the Children, if you haven't heard of us, we're over 100 years old. We believe every child deserves a future. We work in the United States and more than 120 countries around the world, giving kids a healthy start in life, the opportunity to learn, and protection from harm. Now, here in the US, we have had programming since 1932. We actually started the first hot lunch program during the Depression in Kentucky, meeting kids and families' immediate needs there, and we haven't stopped. We've been working to meet kids and families' urgent needs and long-term needs in the US since that time. You know, one of our main priorities is early learning and education, and we have early learning and supplemental education programs all across rural America, focused on getting kids ready for kindergarten, as well as ensuring that they are meeting the proficiency requirements for third grade reading, so they can make that switch from learning to read to reading to learn. And we focus on rural communities because they're, especially the most impoverished rural communities, have little to no family resources. Oftentimes, we are the only nonprofit in the communities that we work, and we work in more than 200 communities across rural America. We also respond to emergencies, hurricanes, natural disasters, ensuring kids get, kids and families get what they need after a disaster, and we also work to meet their social and emotional needs. During COVID, we have still worked to maintain our early learning and educational programs, and adapting those based on the communities where we work, safely providing in-person services if we can, or hybrid services or virtual services. We've also pivoted our programming, going back to our origins in a sense, and have been working with partners and school districts all across the country to ensure kids are getting critical meals, being that is one of kind of the biggest hardships that has been brought on by COVID in terms of food insecurity. So we've been working to help provide meals in all the communities we work and beyond, and have helped prepare and deliver nearly 21 million meals this past year. I'm now going to turn it back to Annette to talk a little more about First Start partnerships.
Thank you, Jeremy. I've known of Save the Children for a long time, but I've learned so much more from your introduction. So thank you for that and for your work. First Start Partnerships for Children and Families, as I said, has been the Head Start federal grantee since 1965. And about a dozen years ago, really expanded the availability of high quality early childhood programs, started with Head Start through pre-K count state funding. And so since that time, we've gone from serving 279 children to 712 children all across the county, with all 5 school districts in Franklin County. And about 2 years ago, changed our name and our mission statement to reflect that growth and change and our ability to serve more and more children and families with free, high quality preschool that is comprehensive, that ensures that children have the health services that they need, the social services for our Head Start families to help them to be gainfully employed and help them to move out of poverty. And so our mission statement reflects that we partner with our families, schools, and communities to ensure that each child arrives ready for kindergarten. And we do partner with many of the people here on this call. I see Heather from CVSM, Cumberland Valley School of Music, and the school districts really help us to make sure that we are serving about almost 70% of Franklin County's families qualify you can earn up to 300% of the federal poverty guidelines, and being able to bring this curriculum and readiness for kindergarten, those comprehensive services is something that takes all of us in the community to be able to do.
Great, thank you for that, Annette. So getting to the childhood report, this year's report, it was our 5th annual report. We started issuing these in 2017, and in most years we've had both a global report and a US complement. And in past years, much like this year, we've been looking at, our researchers have examined the factors that are cutting childhood short, both in the US and around the world. In past years, those have been, factors like adolescent pregnancy, child hunger, graduation rates, globally, child marriage, items like that. This year's report, we focused exclusively on those factors that we saw were compounded by COVID. And traditionally, this report is issued in early June around International Children's Day, but we chose to release this in early March, right around the 1-year mark of national school closures due to COVID, and right around when COVID really began to take hold here in the US. So getting to this year's report, at the heart of it is a first of its kind COVID child protection ranking. And this ranking examines where in the US kids are faring best and where they're faring worse during COVID. Now, how did our researchers analyze this? Well, they focused on 3 hardships, as I noted, that were compounded by COVID. That's hunger, lack of tools for remote learning, so that includes internet and access to a computer or digital device. And thirdly, they looked at difficulty for families paying bills. More specifically, in terms of the research source, they looked at biweekly US Census Bureau household pulse surveys. So every other week, the Census Bureau issued these pulse surveys to families all across the US, over 100,000 families, equally in each of the states. And the reason our researchers looked at 4 months worth of these biweekly surveys is it was right around August that they started introducing questions about economic hardships and difficulty paying bills. And ultimately, it was that combination of those three factors that we wanted to look at more specifically to compile this COVID child protection. So when you look at state by state, how each of the states fared across all three of those factors, top states included Minnesota and Utah, tied for that #1 spot, followed by Washington, New Hampshire, and North Dakota. Um, at the bottom of the rankings, Louisiana is hurting the most, followed by Mississippi, Texas, New Mexico, and Alabama. Now, what's interesting is if you put this COVID child protection ranking side by side with the COVID case rates for each of the states, it doesn't mean that if a state had the lowest COVID case rate, that they would be the highest on our COVID child protection list. It really comes down to those states that have the protections and support and resources for kids and families. What we see is that the top states have a history of prioritizing programs for kids. That includes investing in early childhood education, investing in e-learning, internet access, and initiatives that ensure kids are getting healthy nutrition and meals. So here's a look at a heat map of the COVID child protection, where kids are most and least protected during COVID. As you can see, blue states being in the top 10, but the orange/yellow states being in the bottom 10. The top states are a little more scattered. You have northeastern states, some in the Midwest and West and Northwest. But it's clear, in looking at the bottom 10 states, where kids and families are really struggling when it comes to the pandemic around these factors. It's the South, and more specifically leans towards the Southeast. Now, rounding out the top 10 states, places 6 through 10 include Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, Colorado, Oregon, and South Dakota. In the bottom 10, rounding out that list from spots 45 to 41, includes Arkansas, Oklahoma, Georgia, Florida, and New York. We're going to get to your Keystone State a little later and talk about some insights that we found there. So overall, looking at the findings, this report uncovers a devastating reality for kids all across America due to the pandemic. Childhood effectively is in crisis. Millions and millions more kids are now hungry, missing out on learning, and forced into poverty. This includes, according to the report, 17 million hungry kids in America. That's 6 million more than before the pandemic. And in looking at the surveys, that's close to 1 in 5 US families reporting they did not have enough food to eat in December of last year. 2/3 of US families are having difficulty making ends meet. And we found that the number of households with kids that had trouble paying bills doubled last year. And you have at least 1 in 4 kids having trouble accessing the tools that they need for distance learning. At the start of COVID, only 60% of low-income kids were regularly logging in to online schooling, compared to 90% of high-income students. We also saw that inequalities are deepening during the pandemic. Kids who are poor, kids who live in rural areas, and kids from communities of color are more likely to go hungry and lack the tools that they need to be successful for virtual learning. Black and Hispanic families are twice as likely as white families, sorry, my videos, to lack enough food twice as likely to be struggling with housing costs, and about 1.5 times as likely to have difficulty paying bills and lack the tools needed for remote learning. And bottom line, when it comes to learning across the board, many months of learning have been lost. But when it comes to students of color, they stand to lose up to a year of learning by the end of this school year, compared to 7 to 8 months for their white peers. Another tremendous issue for families is, given all those factors, issues with hunger, economic hardships, issues with learning, the levels of anxiety are going through the roof for families. And the lack of childcare is adding to that anxiety. 3 in 4 parents and caregivers have experienced high levels of anxiety during, let me go back. Apologies. 3 in 4 parents and caregivers in America, according to the report, have experienced high levels of anxiety this past year, feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge for at least several days a week. 3 in 5 adults in households with kids reported symptoms of depression. And we know at Save the Children that if parents are feeling this anxiety and symptoms of depression, this is certainly going to trickle down to the kids, affect their behaviors and their performance in school. By April of 2020, 60% of childcare providers across America had closed their doors, and most that remain open had reduced spaces or hours. As of December last year, nearly 1 in 5 parents and caregivers who were not employed said the reason they weren't working was because they were caring for kids not in childcare or home from school. All right, getting to the Keystone State. Pennsylvania falls at 19th among our COVID child protection ranking in terms of how kids have been protected and provided for during the pandemic. Looking at the individual hardships that make up that ranking, in December of last year, nearly 20% of Pennsylvania families reported not having enough to eat. Looking at kids being ready and having what they need for school, 10% of families reported their kids did not have the adequate tools for remote learning. Again, internet access and access to a computer or digital device. And nearly 45% of families reported difficulty paying bills. So to dig even deeper into what local families and kids have been going through during the pandemic, I'm going to turn it to Annette to talk about the surveys that they are doing.
Thank you, Jeremy. And certainly seeing the results of your work and your study, we see anecdotally and through our family surveys the impact of COVID-19 here in Franklin County. Let me situate, though, a little bit about this survey so that we know that we have a little less than 10,000 children in Franklin County that are in that 0 to 5 population. And so when I say we serve 712, it's a small number, and certainly not all families that would be eligible, but the population that we have been working with over this past year, we were able to survey and really hear from them how the COVID-19 economic, social, emotional, and physical health aspects had been impacting themselves and their children. So at the time when we conducted the survey, we were seeing that families, first of all, were not interested in participating in a preschool program. So we did see a significant drop in our enrollment from all previous years. So we were working with a little over 500 families going into the school year. It's been really interesting that as we begin to come out of the pandemic this spring, our enrollment is beginning to go up on almost on a daily basis, even though it's the end of the school year. So certainly the parallels between a family's ability to get out and engage and do the things that they normally do, just anecdotally through their participation in our program, we have seen a tremendous difference in that. So we had about not quite half of our families participate in a survey where we asked several questions in preparation for making decisions about our programs and how to help them. And so approximately 220 families answered the surveys. And I'm sorry, Jeremy, you have like a black screen on my screen. Right, there we go. Thank you. And so we did 2 different surveys, one in July and one in August. And we're really trying to get at what were their highest concerns. And what we found really parallels what Jeremy is describing, that the highest number of families that responded with their concerns was accessing food or other essentials. Now, our program does offer free breakfast and lunch. Of course, this is summertime when most of our programs were not in operation, but we really did hear that over and over, that there was concern in accessing food and other essentials, paying bills, so that economic impact was their highest concern. The second highest concern, and Jeremy talked about this as well, and anecdotally, we really saw and learned more about the lack of availability of high quality childcare and being able to access that. And he shared how many childcare programs actually have gone out of business, and we have seen some of that locally as well. So accessing childcare that's reliable, safe, nurturing, educationally stimulating. Our programs operate 5.5 to 6 hours per day. So with the exception of one location that does have full day services. So our program hasn't been the answer for that, except for part-time work. But those families who, particularly moms who were wanting to work, we're really struggling with, where do I find openings for my child, especially younger children, the infants and toddlers. Our availability to serve them in our local community is very small. And then the third highest concern for those families was their health and safety, exposing themselves or their family to COVID-19, and being unsure, of course, at that time, what their involvement in the community could be and how they would be able to stay safe at that point in time. And then the fourth area of concern was just this overwhelming sense of not being secure in continuing to have their income. So the idea of being able to maintain their job, whether they would lose their job, even if they hadn't lost their job, was very prevalent on their minds. And because we do have 127 staff members in our program, and we surveyed them at the same time, it was really interesting to learn that that was one of the highest areas of concern for our staff members as well. That there was just this overwhelming sense that even if you did have a job, you were concerned about losing your job, that uncertainty of the economic stability of our country and our region at that time. And then we asked some questions about making sure that as we moved and continued to move into what we called First Start at Home, or what we developed into is essentially classes via Zoom for those that had that availability. We were limited. It was not a full day. These are 3- and 4-year-old children and infants and toddlers. So we were limited to 15 minutes per day that we would use on Zoom. But then we also provided other activities and worked very closely with families. So that strengthened that partnership with families to be able to offer our services, the First Start at Home. But we needed to assess how, what was their ability to be able to do that. So what we learned is that 36% had no computer or device that at that time they thought they could use. Some families did not understand that they could use their phone. But when we dug a little deeper, what we found is that it was that they had multiple children. And so one of the barriers to accessing our program really was that they had school-age children that maybe were already using those devices, and maybe they were working from home themselves. And you add all of that up, and there just wasn't a device available at that time. We found that about 10% had no internet service. And so at that point in time, really figuring out where we might be able to get that and even provide that service, we became a very important aspect of our ability to provide services. And as a snapshot in time, because this was back in July and August, what our families reported was that someone in their household, 20% of them had lost employment, somebody in their household. Again, we saw the presentation this morning to know that there have been many of those jobs that have come back. And as we reopen even more, we expect those to come back as well. But we also know that women in particular, if they don't have the availability of childcare and the other pieces that they need to be employed, that they may continue, and we've heard anecdotally, make that option not to return to the workforce so that they are able to provide what they need to provide to their families. So as a snapshot in time, that is what we learned from families that very much parallels what Jeremy is describing from the Save the Children report. We really are looking forward to more information from our families and are participating with other Head Start agencies. We just launched a 3-week survey that will be surveying all of our families, whether they're in Head Start or early Head Start, which serves prenatal through age 3 with center-based services in Waynesboro and home visiting across the county, in-home visiting programming on a weekly basis, as well as our pre-K counts programs, which has availability in all 5 school districts. So we're going to survey all of them. And this is something we'll be doing every year, but this year, just as Save the Children has done, there's really a focus on the impact that COVID-19 has had on your family. So it will be really interesting to see the results of that survey. We're shooting for, again, about half participation and trying to make it simple and easy for our families to participate. So I look forward to sharing that data as that becomes available in a few weeks.
Great, Annette. Thank you so much for those great local insights and the work that your nonprofit is doing there. Bear with me for just a sec. I'm going to switch to a video very shortly. Also want to express my apologies. After being on Zoom for well over a year, day in and day out, did not realize that my video thumbnail would be in the way of my slides. So hopefully that didn't detract from the information that you were receiving. Next, I just want to share a very brief video that accompanied our childhood report um, shows sort of an individual family's experience around remote learning, and really provides, some of those insights you may already know, the struggle for parents to ensure that learning keeps going at their home, given all the disruptions that have been going on at schools and childcare centers and preschools. Um, so without further ado, I'll start the video.
Two kids, Aubrey, who is 7, and Kaden, who is 5. Aubrey, she loves cheerleading and dance. And Kaden, he's finally old enough to do karate, but we can't, you're afraid to take your kids places now. And I feel like there's a lot that I haven't done with them that I should. And that's actually why I finally just quit my job about 2 weeks ago, because it just got to the point where it was taking so much time away from them. And Kaden was crying. He didn't want me to go to work. I love that they bring these different workbooks here, especially since everything with the virus has been going on. A lot of families can't just go out there and buy books, or they don't have access to the library right now or anything like that. Kids need books. They need to read them. The parents need to read to them. It helps with their imagination. It teaches them stuff. If you don't get them excited about learning and reading now, they're never going to be excited for it in the future.
Right, and just want to share one other video, which hones in on a community's experience around food insecurity and how we're working to support there.
Marion County School District, we are 93% free or reduced in our lunch applications. Those applications based on need and based on income. So we are a needy district. Save the Children has enabled us to go above and beyond as far as feeding our children. Kids come through and you see where they're coming from, and you see them and you know that what you're doing and what you're providing for them, even though you may think it's small, is really big to them. They'll give you big hugs. They're just very appreciative. They say thanks many times. They miss the staff because they look after them and they make sure that they're comfortable, that they're fed, they're not hungry.
Right, and lastly, before we open it up to some questions, just wanted to share our report's landing page and show you some resources there if you were interested in learning more. I'll get into this interactive map shortly, but down towards the bottom, you can download the report itself. There's also an opportunity if you want to learn more about advocating for kids, not only for ensuring they're getting the food and meals that they need, but you can also learn more about our advocacy arm, Save the Children Action Network, and how it's working to ensure kids are getting quality early childhood education. And you can certainly become part of our network and advocate for issues and policies that are best supporting kids in these areas. And there's also a section for parents and families to get further tips on how to keep learning going at home during the pandemic. So when it comes to this map, another heat map here, but interactive, and you can hover over any state you like. In this case, we'll focus on Pennsylvania. And if you click on Pennsylvania, you can see that COVID child protection ranking that I talked about before, 19th out of all 50 states. You can also find what's called the childhood equity gap for Pennsylvania. And this actually stems from our report last year, where we looked at childhood at the county level. Given these factors down here, that report, and traditionally our childhood reports have looked at these factors in the US: infant deaths, child hunger, high school dropouts, teen pregnancy, and child homicides and suicides. So that childhood equity gap effectively um, is the ratio between the top county, according to these factors, and the bottom county in Pennsylvania. And what that means with an equity gap of 3 means that the kids in the lowest county in Pennsylvania are 3 times more likely to see their childhood cut short. A lot of math going into that, and hopefully it doesn't seem too complicated, but in the end, if you're interested, you can look county by county in Pennsylvania at all these factors that our report traditionally looks at. As you can see, Franklin County here, I'd have to go back up to see where the factors land. But anyway, you can look at specifically for Franklin County, all those factors, as well as the child poverty rate in Franklin County, or any county in Pennsylvania, or the US. The one caveat is there are certain counties that didn't report all these factors. So if you do go down to the bottom of the list, there's some of the counties that we were unable to rank because they did not have reporting on one of these factors. But some further information specific to your state and your local county that you can look up related to kids and families and what they're going through. So that is, I'm going to stop sharing. That's everything Annette and I have, and I would love to open it up to you guys to see if you have any questions related to what we talked about, or anything else specific to our organizations or kids and families and their need for support during this time.
Jeremy, while we wait for questions, I do see Doris has a question in the chat box. She asks, how does one sign up to support the children and the families?
Well, there's a couple ways you could help. You know, if you're talking specifically for Save the Children and its support of families in the US related to education and food insecurity. If you go to our website, you can hone in on the particular program that you're interested in, and you know, there's certain ways to donate related to those programs. Another way to support is to lend your voice for kids. So if you go to that childhood report landing page, there is a way to access our advocacy arms, Save the Children Action Network, or shortly known as SCAN. You could visit their site and learn how to sign up and learn new ways to advocate for kids. You know, they are, you know, on top of every kids issue when it comes to education and food security in the US, childcare issues in the US. And, you know, they have, you can also sign up for their kind of action alerts via email, where if you opt in and decide to take action, you can send an email to your legislator. So those are a couple ways, at least through Save the Children, that you can work to both advocate and support kids that we're supporting.
And if you're interested locally, Doris, there are many not-for-profits that are working on behalf of children and families. For example, if you're interested in food security, South Central Community Action Program, or SCAP, would greatly benefit from your support if you are able to either volunteer or financial support. I'll speak on their behalf in interest for them. If you're interested in specific aspects, including early childhood education or music, music is such an important aspect of our resiliency of our children and families and mental health. I know that Cumberland Valley School of Music, as well as First Star Partnerships, is participating in the downtown Chambersburg Duck Derby. So if you go to their website and look at the Duck Derby, you can support organizations that support children and families. So locally, we do have many opportunities for you to both volunteer, financially support, and I think, as Jeremy said, really just be an advocate for children and families, all children and families, but in particular, those that are struggling economically, those that are from diverse backgrounds, ethnically. I know our program serves approximately 20% of our families are from the Hispanic community, mostly in the downtown Chambersburg area. So I know I would be happy, and I'm sure that Nikki would be happy to help route any additional thoughts that you have individually about different ways that you can support locally.
Yeah, so actually in our next session, Healthy Franklin County and I, or Noel Purdy and I, are going to present on different things related to food insecurity, and also talk about the food security task force through Healthy Franklin County. So, yep, I'll be happy to connect you.
Yeah, I would just add, certainly interrupt me if you have a question, but when it comes to advocacy, we have seen quite a number of victories in the past couple months when it comes to the American Rescue Plan and what's coming up with the American Families Plan. But the thing about those initiatives that we're going to still fight for is effectively they are for a good period of time, but they aren't permanent. And the impact of COVID is not going to go away once the disease does, in terms of the impact on kids and families and what they're going through economically and trying to get food on the table. So some of these initiatives, specifically to food security, they need to be made permanent so families can be continually supported.
And I am putting Noel's contact information in the chat as well as mine.
Let me also put mine in there. And this is, my first experience, being a part of a Franklin County event. So it's great to meet you all, and don't want the conversation to end here. Let me know if you ever have any questions about the work that we do, or if there's any local partnerships that you're interested in. We do have, we call it sort of our DIY group, but we do have I have team members that work with people who are interested in advocating and raising money for these issues, and we do it all across the US. So if you really are passionate about these issues and want to do more, I can connect you with that team.